back to my channel. Today in this video I'm going to be comparing three cranksets. They're all going to be the Rode Shimano series. This is the 105 7000 crankset. I have also a little slightly older Ultegra 6800 series, and then I'm going to also compare that with Dura Ace 11 speed 9000 crankset. So let's go get right to it. So a quick little disclaimer here is that the 105 is the newest series. These are all 11-speed cranksets, but the 105 is the 7000 series, which is equivalent to an Ultegra 8000. However, here I have the Ultegra 6800, and then I also have the Dura Ace 9000 series, the newest series that is the same generation as the 105 7000 would actually be the Dura Ace 9100 series. Currently on Shimano's website, you're able to compare the two generations. So I'm using my Dura Ace 9000 crankset, my Ultegra 6800, and the Shimano 105 crankset. One thing to note on the Shimano, which is actually interesting, is that also the Shimano comes in a 160 millimeter crank arm length. However, the Dura Ace and the Ultegra do not get that small. Also, there's also estimated weights. This is the Dura Ace, Ultegra, and 105. Another noticeable difference, or one thing to note, is this Q factor. The Q factor on both the Dura Ace and the Shimano 105 is 146 millimeters, and it's just slightly wider, only 0.6 of a millimeter wider. So I wouldn't be able to notice it, but it is in the specs and something to pay attention to. Also, recommended bottom brackets. So if you have like a BB86 bottom bracket, these are the bottom brackets that should fit for the Dura Ace. You get the Dura Ace and then the Ultegra and the 105. Or if you have a threaded bottom bracket, these are the bottom brackets that they do recommend. Also, you can pay attention to the average weights for the Dura Ace, Ultegra, and the 105. This is the 105 7000 crankset, and let's go ahead and take a look at this inner chainring. There's extra reinforcements around here, which probably adds a little bit of weight. So pay attention to this little extra thickness spot right there, and you can see, let me go see if I can focus this up a little bit, that it does add a little bit of thickness to the inner chainring. It may make the chainring just a little more stiff. Okay, let's move on to the Ultegra chainring. This is the 6800, and notice that there's no extra bump here on the inner chainring. It's just flat. I haven't noticed a difference between the Ultegra or 105 or Dura Ace when I'm pedaling, but maybe if you get into lots and lots of power, you might notice a little difference, but I can't tell a difference. Let's go to the Dura Ace one now. Now let's go look at this Dura Ace inner chainring. Notice that it is hollowed out a little bit, that there is a cutout on this inner chainring, and that's, I'm assuming, to save a little bit of weight. If you notice that the weight difference is that the Dura Ace is the lightest of all three of these cranksets that I'm comparing, and I apologize, it is a little dirty. This crankset does have a few thousand miles on it, and I didn't give it a good deep clean before this video. Okay, this part of the comparison is actually what I'm kind of looking forward to, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to measure the distance between these two bolts with all three of the cranksets. I'm going to see if there is any compatibility issues, and I think there will be. So I'm doing the best I can for center to center for the 105 7000 crankset, and right there it comes out to be about 63.5 millimeters across. I just moved it over to the Dura Ace 9000, and it looks like it might be similar. Wow, that's surprising since they're different generations. Let's go try the Ultegra. So I haven't moved it. Still at 63.5 millimeters across, and it looks like it's also right on. So maybe they are compatible. Back to the 105 back to the 105 crankset. This is about 91.3 millimeters across the lengthwise. I'm going to keep the same measurement here, then I'm going to switch over to the Ultegra. So the Ultegra here, I'm going to go ahead and move this into shot, and it looks like it fits about the same. And we'll finally move over to the Dura Ace crankset and go ahead and see if this one also fits with. And this one, it looks like it's might be a little longer here. This isn't going to the center of the bolt. There's only one way to find out for sure, and that's to take them apart and mix and match. So the tool you need to remove the chainring bolts for these is a star drive wrench, and this is a T30 that I'll be using. And here's just a close-up of the wrench. And here's just a view of the 105 on the left, the Ultegra in the middle, and the Dura Ace on the right. So I just removed the bolts from the 105 crankset, the 7000, and it looks like there's no Loctite or blue thread locker on these bolts when they're factory installed. And this is a brand new crankset. Here are the bolts on the Ultegra crankset, and they do feel a little bit lighter than the 105. And finally, here's a look at the Dura Ace bolts. Also looks like there's no thread locker on the bolts. And you can tell this is a Dura Ace crankset because if you look, it's kind of hollowed out here at the groove. So I'm just going to take a look at the inner chainring right here. And this inner chainring for the 105 is about 33 grams. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Ultegra R6800. And that also is 33 grams, and I'd be surprised if the Dura Ace 9000 is also 33 grams with the hollowed out area. And you save 6 to 7 grams just for the inner chain ring on the Dura Ace. Okay, now I'm going to take a look at the 4 bolts. This is the Shimano 105 bolts, and these are the Dura Ace bolts. And my prediction is that these 105 bolts are just slightly heavier than the Ultegra and the Dura Ace. First up on the scale are these 105s. They come in at 11.9 grams. Next we have the Ultegra 6800, and that comes out to 5.4 grams. These came off the Dura Ace 9000 crankset. They look to be the same as the Ultegra 6800, and they are 5.4 grams. So what I learned from weighing them is that if you upgrade to these lighter bolts, you could save just as much weight as going from a 105 all the way up to a Dura Ace level small 34 tooth chainring. So taking a closer look at, this is the 105, next one on top is the Ultegra, and this is the Dura Ace. You can see that, hopefully to see that right here it's flat. There's a flat mount here, there's an indentation mount, and also the same with the Dura Ace. So they sit a little different, they mount a little different to the crankset. The Ultegra and the Dura Ace, the bolts fixed on the inside, there's a little cutout, so they're machined a little different. And the 105, it just looks like it's drilled out, and this part right here is flush, and this part has a little indentation. So that's one thing to note about the mounting. Alright, so I have the 105 inner chainring here. I'm going to go ahead and see if it mounts on this FC6800 Ultegra crankset. So I mounted the first bolt inside, and it looks like the holes line up. Alright, so we do have success. The 105 R7000 chainring fits on the 6800 crankset. Now keep in mind that, as I mentioned earlier, these bolts are going to sit a little further out, so just keep in mind that, because if these bolts are sitting further out here and you have a chain catcher, if it's real close to the chain ring, every time you pedal it may hit all 4 of these bolts, so clunk, 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 clunk every time you pedal. Also, I'm not sure how the spacing is, and I have not tried this out on my bike because I'm keeping the group sets the same. I'm keeping the 105 shifting similar by keeping the chain rings all to their respective crankset. And before I want to move on to compare the 105 chainring onto the Dura Ace, I just want to note that this is the 105 R7000 bolt, and it is cross-compatible with the Ultegra Bolt 2. So the threading and the pitch is the same. So if you wanted to go ahead and just upgrade the bolts and you find some cheaper hardware, go ahead and do that to save 6, 7, 8 grams or so. Alright, with thicker grooves, this is the 105 R7000 small inner chainring on the Dura Ace 9000 crankset. Wow, I'm very surprised the 105 inner chainring fits on the Dura Ace. I didn't think it would. So this 105 inner ring on the Dura Ace still does not slit flush because there's no indentation on this chainring. I'll show you what it looks like with the Dura Ace or the stock chainring on. Okay, this is the Dura Ace stock, so it's the bolt on the chainring itself. And as you can see, it almost sits very flush. So if you do have a chain catcher and it comes real close, you don't have to worry about that bolt protruding and hitting the chain catcher every rotation, which I have had it hit on in another bike like the 105. Here's a look at the 6800 or the Ultegra chainring on the Dura Ace 9000 crankarms. So if you have a Dura Ace 9000 crankset and you want to upgrade, or sorry, you want to replace your inner chainring, but you don't want to spend the big bucks on the 9000, it appears that the 6800 inner chainring will fit on your crankset, and it does sit pretty flush as well, unlike the 105, which doesn't have the indentation. Okay, so now I'll briefly look at the large chainring. All of these chainrings are a 50 tooth. You got the 105 on the left, the Ultegra in the middle, and the Dura Ace on the right. Okay, starting off with the Shimano 105 outer chainring. That looks like it's 144 grams. Next we have the Ultegra 6800. And this one's only 112 grams. So my prediction is the Dura Ace is going to be the lightest. And finally the Dura Ace chainring. Oh, it's sitting on something. And that's 101 grams. So as I mentioned earlier, the 105 chainring and crankset that I have on this far left is brand new. The Ultegra and the Dura Ace both have several thousand miles on it. I think I have the most miles on my Dura Ace. And if you take a look at the chain rings, maybe just because it's silver and not this black color, it appears that the Dura Ace chain rings have less wear than the Ultegra. Both bikes that I use the chain rings on, I maintain them very well. I clean the chain after every single ride, and I lubricate them every single ride. And I also clean the chain rings about every week or so to make sure that they're in good operating condition. My guess is on these Dura Ace rings I have 4,000 to 5,000 miles, and maybe on the Ultegra closer to 2,000 to 3,000 miles on them. And it looks from this image here, it appears that the Ultegra is showing a little more wear than the Dura Ace. But is it worth almost double the price? Well, that's for you to make the determination if you're willing to pay that much more for the the more expensive Dura Ace chain rings. I personally like the looks of this Dura Ace chain ring a little more than the 105 and Ultegra, so I opted to buy the full crankset, and that's why I have a Dura Ace chain ring and crankset in addition to the Ultegra and the 105. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at the weight difference of the 105 arm itself. Keep in mind that this is a 165 and the other two are 172.5 millimeters long, so it's not a completely fair comparison. So the advantage should go to this 105. This is 323 grams. Here's the Ultegra one, and this comes out to be 332 grams. And again, keep in mind that, as you can see, this is a 172.5, so it's a little longer, should be a little heavier. And let's move on to the Dura Ace, which is also a 172.5. So my personal opinion is I really like the look of this Dura Ace. And so the finish is real nice, it's kind of glossy, and so I decided to go with the Dura Ace. And this one comes out to 310 grams. So you do save a little bit of weight on just this crank arm, and I'll go ahead and check the left crank arm as well. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh all of these with the bolts on. As you can see, there's some bolts here on each side. The 105 for this left arm is 193 grams, and again this is a 165, so it should be a little lighter than if this 105 were a 172.5. Let's take a look one more time. 193. Moving on to the Ultegra, also has the bolts. 198 grams. And then we have the Dura-Ace, and that comes in at 175 grams. I also have a different generation of Dura-Ace Stages power meter. So we'll see if you want to know if the 7900 series, I believe, is any lighter than the 9000, or if it's about the same weight. So this is 186 grams, and they're both 172.5 millimeters. So about 10 grams lighter by switching from the older generation to the 9000 series. Before I put the crankset back together, I also wanted to show you the inside of the 105 chainring. And it looks like the indentation, it's only on one side, but this is the side that's sandwiched between the chainring and the larger chainring, and this is actually the side that goes on the part that faces the frame. So if you're riding and this is the forward direction, this is the part that faces to the left. And maybe this is so that you don't hit the bolt. The bolt, because it's flat here and the bolt sticks out a little bit when you do install it, then maybe a chain catcher could just rub along here and just go over the bolt. So that's actually good design that Shimano did with this. Moving on to the Ultegra chainring, see that it does have recessed indentations, as I mentioned earlier. And on the other side, because there's a recessed area, you know which way the bolt goes, that the bolt goes this way inward, and if you're on the right side, this is the way that you would pedal. And I haven't had any interference with the chain catcher that I use for the Ultegra. Moving on to the Dura-Ace, you can see that it also is recessed, and this part is also hollowed out. Now I thought when I turned it over it'll be flat, but to my surprise this side also is hollowed out, so they're cutting even more weight. Now, I'm not sure if that makes it more fragile or not, but I think the engineers did a good job, because I can't tell any difference from when I'm putting out power in the small chainring on the Ultegra versus the Dura-Ace cranksets. I'm definitely not a pro rider, so I can't tell the difference between the Ultegra and the Dura-Ace cranksets on a blind test. So if you're blindfold me and I didn't know which bike I'm riding, I probably wouldn't know what crankset I was on. I might be able to tell the difference between 165 and 172.5 crankarm lengths, but definitely if they're the same 172.5 as in the case of both my cranksets, that I can't tell the difference. Now if you look at the wear and tear of the inner chainring, again, the Ultegra probably has a little less wear and tear, or should, because there's fewer miles than the Dura-Ace one. This Dura-Ace one is probably 4,000 or 5,000 miles on it again, and then on the Ultegra to the left here I probably only have 2,000 to 3,000 miles on these teeth. As you can see, the wear is about similar. I don't think that the Dura-Ace is wearing out much faster, and if I were to upgrade the chain rings from the Ultegra, I'm not sure if I'll go to the Dura-Ace or I'll just stick with the Ultegras. They seem to be working out just fine for me. Looking at the 105 crankset here, I just wanted to see if the Ultegra or Dura-Ace bolts would fit onto the 105 crankset, and indeed it does fit on. So if you want to save those extra 7-8 grams, you can go ahead and find a set of Ultegra or Dura-Ace chainring bolts and swap them out on the 105 crankset if that's what you have. And if anything, it does look like the Ultegra bolt here might be a little different size. It might stick out just slightly bit, maybe 0.5 millimeter, but I can't tell just by looking at it. I don't know, what do you think? You could take a look here and see how flush that is, and then let's move on to this side. They're very similar. If anything, the Ultegra might stick out just a slightly bit more. So be forewarned about that. Okay, let's go take a look at these end caps now. The one on the right is actually from the 105. It's a lot more thread to it. And the one on the left here is for the Ultegra and the Dura-Ace. They're pretty much the same end caps, but I'm assuming that since there's less threading on the Ultegra and Dura-Ace version, that it's going to weigh slightly less. So onto the scale is the Ultegra and Dura-Ace end cap at 3.4 grams. And let's swap it out with the little slightly thicker 105. and that's 5.2 grams. And if you're curious, I have a metal one from a Dura A7800 crankset. And that's actually lighter than the 105. That 105 was 5.2 grams. This is a whole gram lighter, even being aluminum or a metal. Alright, it's time to weigh the complete crankset without the end cap. So I'm just going to put the whole crankset on here and balance it. And this one looks like it's the 105 7000. Comes out to be 704 grams. Next is the Ultegra. And this one's coming out to be 681 grams. Finally, I have the Dura Ace 9000 crankset or chain set. And this one's a little harder to balance. Hold on. As you can see here, it's super smooth, so it just slides right off the scale. And it looks like this Dura Ace 9000 crankset's coming in to be 621 grams without the end cap. Well, there you have it, the 105 Ultegra and Dura Ace crankset or chain set, or Shimano calls it a chain wheel. Let me know if you have any questions or comments in this comment section below. And again, thanks in advance if you do subscribe and give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. Helps the channel out. And thanks for watching. Much appreciated.